There are storms that take everything in one night, and there are storms that take everything in silence. Slowly, over years. They don't break your house. They rot the foundation beneath it. No one sees it happening, not even you. And then one day, a habit you thought was harmless starts feeling like a hole you can't fill anymore. Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck. That wreck didn't just sink a vessel, it ended who he was and forced him to start again. Most men don't get a wreck that obvious. Most don't get waves. They get whispers, late night silence, one more scroll, one more release, one more promise that tomorrow they'll stop. But it's not tomorrow yet, and the damage is already happening. Not because of what they're doing, but because of what they've stopped becoming. We don't talk about this, not honestly. Most men carry this like a secret scar. They joke about it, normalize it, defend it, but deep down, they feel it. Something is eroding, not loudly, not violently, quietly, like water under stone. Masturbation isn't just about release. For many men, it's become their last refuge from emotional weight. Stress, loneliness, guilt, numbness. It's not pleasure anymore, it's escape. And every time you escape, something inside you becomes less willing to return. There's a moment most men don't speak of, after, when the silence feels heavier than it did before. Not because of shame, but because something feels missing, like you just handed away part of your fire, part of your presence. You stand in the mirror and feel further from yourself, not because you touched your body, but because you disconnected from your soul. Stoicism never asked you to be perfect, it asks you to be present. Marcus Aurelius didn't demand purity, he demanded honesty. He wrote to himself every morning, not because he was proud, but because he was trying to return, to remember, to hold himself to something higher than impulse. He didn't wait until the damage was visible. He looked for it in its earliest form, where the rot begins, in silence, in secrecy, in the moments no one will ever see. So here's the question Stoicism would ask you, not as judgment, but as mirror. When you wake up tomorrow, will you respect the man who acted tonight? That question is not meant to shame you. It's meant to return you, because you haven't lost your power. You've just been leaking it, slowly, quietly, without meaning to. But now, you see it, and that changes everything. That's the first lie, the most seductive, the one that gives you permission to keep going without looking back. It's just physical, as if your body were separate from your mind, as if you could keep indulging the flesh without shaping the man who walks with it. But the truth is quieter and heavier. Every act you repeat, your nervous system remembers, not just the touch, but the emptiness after, the scrolling, the guilt you won't name, the distraction you call relief. The body doesn't forget, even if your mind tries to. You might say it's harmless, you might even laugh it off, but your energy changes. Your voice lowers, your eyes lose a kind of focus, not overnight, but gradually. And each time, the line between discipline and desire blurs just a little more. Until one day, your motivation, your drive to move forward, feels muffled, like something's blocking the signal from within. There's a reason Stoics spoke of logos, of inner order, as the root of strength. Zeno didn't build his philosophy on denial. He built it on alignment, to act in contradiction with your own clarity. That's the first fracture. It doesn't shatter you all at once. It erodes you, slowly. Every time you feed the urge without question, you trade long-term strength for short-term sedation. Not because you're weak, but because you've forgotten what structure feels like. And you might still get up, still work, still speak with presence, but something in your foundation shifts, something you don't talk about, something only silence reveals. That after enough nights of calling it just physical, you stop feeling like the man who used to lead with purpose. You start feeling like someone who just copes. You're not broken, but you are being shaped. And if you don't choose how, your patterns will choose for you. You can't keep separating your hands from your head, your body from your vision, because every act is forming something, even the ones you do alone, especially the ones you do alone. Zeno wouldn't ask you to stop. He would ask, is this building your structure or breaking it? That's the real question, one only you can answer. In silence, after, when the release is over, and the emptiness remains. That's the second lie, the one dressed in decency, the one that lets you feel moral while you still betray something deeper. You tell yourself you're not crossing any lines, you're not lying, you're not touching anyone else, so it must be safe, harmless, just you, alone, trying to stay disciplined in a world that pulls at you from every direction. But here's what that story leaves out. Every act still leaves a mark, and the one it marks is you. It's not about whether you're hurting someone else. It's about what you're slowly doing to the man you were trying to become. There's a betrayal here, one that doesn't make noise, one that doesn't involve anyone else's name, one that only shows up when you try to be present with someone you care about, and you feel distant, not because you don't want to connect, but because your nervous system has been rewired to prefer isolation over intimacy, reaction over ritual, sedation over depth. The truth is, you can't train your body to avoid emotional vulnerability and then expect it to show up fully when real connection knocks. Each time you seek release without responsibility, you're rehearsing distance. You're rehearsing emotional exit. You're choosing friction over feeling. And over time, your relationships suffer. Not because you're bad, not because you're unfaithful, but because you're less available, less rooted, less able to stay. Stoicism doesn't measure virtue by what the world sees. It measures it by how aligned you are with your own code, with what you know in your bones to be honorable. It's not about what's allowed, it's about what's worthy. And that's what this lie tries to bury, that there's a part of you quietly watching every compromise, not punishing, just recording. And eventually, that record becomes your reflection. You say you're not hurting anyone, but what if that someone is the man you could have been, the one who stood in his tension, who chose stillness over distraction, who used his loneliness to deepen, not disappear? What if the cost of your silence is your presence, your capacity to lead, love, and stand fully inside your own fire? You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to shut down your desire. But you do need to ask, honestly, if the way you're managing it is making you stronger or making you smaller. Because the Stoic path is not about denying heat. It's about learning how to hold it, with reverence, with structure, without burning the temple down from the inside. This is the third lie, the one that blends in, the one that wraps itself in culture, in statistics, in shared silence. Everyone does it, so it must be fine, harmless, even healthy. But Stoicism was never about what's common. It was about what's clean, what's ordered, what's necessary to remain whole when the world around you fragments. What's normal has never been the compass for greatness. Herd behavior rewards comfort, but comfort rarely carves strength. What everyone does is often what no one questions, and that's where erosion begins. Not in chaos, but in routine, in repetition that becomes identity, in gestures so small they barely register, until one day you look at yourself and realize the edge is gone, the weight is gone. The man who used to stand in his decisions now kneels in habits he never chose consciously. The normalization trap works because it numbs, because it hands you belonging in exchange for discipline. But Stoicism calls you to rise above the crowd, not blend with it. Zeno didn't find himself by agreeing with others. He found clarity in collapse. He lost everything, and he didn't look to the masses for healing. He listened to the silence. He walked toward structure, not approval. You might not feel shame right after. That's not always how it shows up. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it's just a heaviness, a fog, a lack of fire, a hesitation in your speech, a delay in your decisions. You still move, but not with conviction. You still speak, but not from depth. And that, over time, is more dangerous than guilt, because it's subtle. It doesn't alarm you. It just softens your soul's posture until you call it normal too. The truth is, you're not here to live like everyone else. Not because you're better, but because you're called to remember, to hold a line in a culture that keeps erasing it, to rebuild the man who doesn't answer to comfort, but to clarity. And that begins by questioning what the world tells you to accept, especially when that world profits from your numbing. So ask yourself, is normal giving you peace, or just permission to stay asleep? Stoicism doesn't offer comfort. It offers coherence. And when you begin to see clearly, you stop needing the crowd to tell you who you are. You begin to walk alone, not in arrogance, but in alignment. And that's where peace lives. Not in the noise of everyone, but in the stillness of a man who finally remembers himself. This is the fourth lie, the one that disguises sedation as self-care. It helps me sleep. It keeps me calm. It takes the edge off. Maybe it does, for a moment. But relief isn't the same as release, and comfort isn't the same as peace. What you're calling rest is often just escape dressed in routine. Masturbation, when used as a sleep aid or stress valve, doesn't resolve the tension. It postpones it. It softens the surface while the core remains stirred. You fall asleep, yes, but you don't fall silent. You wake up without having faced what needed to be faced. The stress remains, the restlessness returns, because it wasn't resolved. It was numbed. Real calm comes from clarity, from making your inner world a place you can stand in, not run from. When a man replaces discipline with distraction, he trains his mind to avoid the sacred discomfort that forges strength. That stillness before sleep, that unrest in your chest, it's not your enemy. It's your signal that you're carrying something unspoken, that your soul wants your attention, not your sedation. Stoicism doesn't forbid you from pleasure, but it demands you examine your relationship with it. Chrysippus warned that what comforts you today may quietly own you tomorrow. And when you ritualize escape under the name of stress relief, what you're really building is dependency masked as habit, a cycle that offers nothing but temporary quiet in exchange for long-term erosion. There's another way, not a perfect one, but a cleaner one, a way that doesn't require friction to feel release, a way that leans into reflection instead of reaction. Sit in silence, write what you're afraid to admit, walk without your phone, let your nervous system settle without being sedated. Reclaim the night not as a time for numbing, but for returning to yourself, because the fire you feel, the one you've been calling stress, might not be something to extinguish. It might be your soul trying to wake you up, not to fight, but to feel, to hold, to transform, without reaching for another moment of forgetting, without handing away one more piece of your stillness just to make it through the night. This is the fifth lie, the most reasonable one, the one that appeals to biology, to instinct, to the argument that because something feels natural, it must be right. It's natural, they say. There's nothing wrong with it, but not everything natural is useful. Not everything instinctive is sacred. Fire is natural, but left unchecked, it destroys. There's a quiet confusion in this belief, a merging of what the body desires with what the soul needs. Yes, the urge is natural, but so is hunger, so is anger, so is fear. What separates a man from chaos is not what he feels, it's how he carries it, what he chooses to do with it. Lions hunt when they are free, but when caged, they pace. And what most men call nature is just habit built inside a cage they no longer question. Seneca warned that many things feel good, but few things are good. And when a man starts to equate comfort with clarity, he stops seeking depth. He starts building a life around impulse and calls it balance. But true masculinity isn't reactive. It's responsible. It doesn't avoid its nature, but it doesn't kneel to it either. Every act you take in private sends a message, not to the world, to you. A message about how you cope, about what you need to get by, about who's really leading, your structure or your craving. And over time, those messages shape your identity, not by what they say, but by what they silently replace. Your fire, your focus, your weight. The shift begins when you stop asking if something is natural and start asking if it's noble. Does this elevate me? Does this deepen my discipline? Or does it feed a pattern that softens me in ways I can't see yet? The Stoic doesn't reject nature. He respects it, but he doesn't let it command him. He walks with it, but only when it aligns with his highest self. So the question isn't, is it natural? The question is it worthy of the man you're becoming? Because every time you act, you teach your body something. And the longer you teach it to settle, to distract, to appease, the harder it becomes to remember how to lead. From intention, from coherence, from the sacred stillness that doesn't chase pleasure, but creates peace. This is the sixth lie, the one that hides behind the mask of responsibility. At least I'm not acting out. At least I'm in control. But what if you're not controlling the urge? What if you're only containing it, just enough to keep it quiet, not enough to transform it? There's a difference between mastery and management. Feeding your urge breadcrumbs to stop it from roaring doesn't make you powerful. It just makes you compliant. The fire is still there. The pressure is still building. And every time you seek relief through habit instead of discipline, you're not leading your desires. You're negotiating with them. Slowly, silently, at the cost of your own edge. Masculine presence is forged in tension, in the moments where fire rises and you stay still. Not out of repression, but out of reverence. Because you know that real strength isn't in reacting, it's in containing heat without collapsing. That's where dignity lives. Not in denying the flame, but in shaping it, in holding it long enough to create direction, not just escape. Epictetus called it the inner citadel. The sacred space within a man that no storm can enter. That place is not built when life is easy. It's built when urges scream and you don't flinch. When the craving shows up and you sit with it, breathe through it, without touching it, without running from it, without pretending it makes you weak to feel it. Control doesn't mean you never want. It means you know exactly why you choose to wait. It means your actions are not dictated by need but by principle. And that principle must be clear, must be honored, must be protected in the moments no one sees, because that's when it matters most. You don't have to be rigid, but you must be rooted. And a rooted man doesn't reach for comfort every time his body trembles. He listens, he learns, he holds. And in that holding, he becomes the kind of man who doesn't have to prove control, because he's already built it, quietly, consistently, from the inside out. This is the seventh lie, the one whispered at the edge of justification. No one knows. It doesn't matter. It's just between me and the silence. But silence doesn't mean it's without consequence. Privacy doesn't mean it's without imprint. What you do when no one's watching isn't invisible. It's foundational. Private habits shape public presence. Maybe you speak the same. Maybe you smile the same. But something in your posture softens. Something in your energy flickers. And the world might not name it, but you feel it. That gap between who you say you are and who you've been rehearsing in the dark. Every silent compromise is a message sent to the man in the mirror. Not a scream, just a quiet erosion. One you barely notice until the reflection starts to look unfamiliar, less anchored, less certain, less sovereign, not because of shame, but because repetition without reverence weakens your relationship with your own edge. Zeno didn't build Stoicism in the public square. He built it in the wreckage, in solitude, in the hard silence after everything external had been stripped away. That's the test. Not what you do when others are watching, but what survives when no one is. Can your rituals survive being seen by the man you're trying to become? You say it doesn't define you, but definition isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It's the accumulation of small, unseen decisions that quietly rewrite your sense of self. You don't feel it all at once, but over time, something inside you forgets how to stand, how to hold tension, how to lead. This isn't about purity or shame. It's about coherence. The sacred alignment between what you believe and how you live when no one's keeping score. Because when that alignment breaks, a man doesn't collapse loudly. He fades, slowly, quietly, until he can no longer feel the strength of his own silence. And you, who once carried the weight of your choices with presence, begin to doubt that weight, not because you're lost, but because you've stopped asking the one question that holds it all together. Am I proud of what I do when no one sees it? That question is the beginning of your return. To clarity, to presence, to the version of yourself that doesn't need eyes on him to walk in truth. There's nothing to fix, only something to remember. You were never weak. You were never broken. You were simply surviving in silence, doing what you could to keep moving, to keep the world from seeing what was unraveling inside. And now, in that same silence, you have a choice. Not to punish, not to pretend, but to rebuild. Zeno didn't renounce pleasure because he hated the world. He renounced indulgence because he had seen what happens when you build your foundation on comfort. It crumbles, not all at once, but over time. And what he chose after his shipwreck wasn't guilt. It was clarity, a life of structure, of limits, of meaning forged in stillness. You're not here to live numb. You're not here to use your private habits as a wall against the weight you don't want to feel. You're here to build a temple inside yourself. One decision at a time, one act of discipline at a time. Each moment of restraint is a stone. Each night you choose reflection over escape as a pillar. You don't need shame, you need structure. Because that structure becomes your sanctuary when everything else falls. Seneca said, "A great man is he who uses little, not because he's deprived, but because he no longer confuses desire with direction. He knows what he's here to protect, and he knows what must be left behind so the soul can stand fully in its weight." You've seen what forgetting looks like. You've tasted the aftermath. You've felt the fog. Now it's time to remember, not by declaring war on yourself, but by reclaiming what was always yours. Your stillness, your clarity, your quiet authority. You've given enough to the noise. You've fed enough to the dark. Now, it's time to build, quietly, daily, with reverence. Not for the world to applaud, but for the man who's waited patiently behind the patterns, watching, holding, ready to return. He's still there, and he's not asking for perfection. He's asking for presence. one choice at a time, one brick at a time, until you can stand in the temple you built and finally feel at home.